Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. There's been a fair bit of hype around the product I'm reviewing today, and that's the KBEAR KS2. As usual with any cheap IEM coming out of China, they tend to be fairly prolific in terms of the exposure to reviewers, both professional reviewers, amateur reviewers, and beginners as well, just getting into the hobby. Now, I'm not criticizing anybody for anything they've written or said about these earphones. My point is that the hype train can very quickly get going, and it can be really hard for people to know what's true and what's not true because you may not know the background of the reviewer sharing the information. Also, sometimes it's just bias caused by the hype train. On the other hand, sometimes products really are that good. So in the case of the KS2, it's a $25 US or about 35 Australian dollar IEM that uses a hybrid design of a dynamic and a balanced armature driver. At that price, the question is always going to be, is it really as good as the hype train says, or are the people saying it's dreadful actually more accurate? So I'm going to try and make sense of that for you today. Let's start with the design, the accessories, and the ergonomics of the KS2. They're a nice small shell, so they're a very small acrylic shell. It's in two pieces that's glued together, and they're very comfortable in terms of the shape. They fit nicely in general. I'll talk more about that in a second. And they look like they're probably a more expensive IEM than $25 US. The cable, on the other hand, is not so great. It looks fine and generally it feels fine, but it's really prone to tangling. The good news is the KS2s have a simple 2-pin connector. You'll see this more in the close-up Glamour video, but it's got a 2-pin connector with just ever so slight a raised section. So almost all 2-pin cables should be able to fit the KS2s no problem. When I said before these cost $25 US, I was referring to the non-microphone version. You can get a version with a mic in the cable for just $1 US more. So $26 US with a mic for the phone, $25 US with no microphone. The one I've got here is the no mic version. Just quickly, I should mention that the builder next door is going hammer and tongs today. So as always, I'll try and avoid getting too much of the noise in the video, but you may hear the occasional drill, saw, or hammer going off in the background. My apologies for that. In terms of accessories, the KS2 is pretty lean on accessories, and that's not unsurprising given that it is a US $25 earphone. It comes with the cable I've already mentioned, a pair of tips installed, and then another 3 pairs of tips in a bag. There's no carry case, there's no pouch of any sort, so you'll need to sort that out for yourself if you're looking to protect the KS2s when you're traveling with them. The tips provided are all single flange silicone. They're fairly comfortable, no complaints about them, and there's a decent range of sizes. While we're talking tips and fit and design, I want to circle back around to the fit from the KS2. One thing about their design is they use an aluminium alloy nozzle. So if I take the tip off here, what you'll see underneath is their brassy, goldy colored nozzle. Now that nozzle is great from a sound quality and longevity point of view. It should be sturdy, and I've generally found metal nozzles do good things for frequency response and sound quality. But what I also found was that the nozzle's fairly thick. So if you're needing to get a slightly deeper insertion of this IEM, you may find it a bit uncomfortable if you've either got narrow ear canals or ear canals with a sharp bend close to the opening. For me, I did find when I was using spin fits and the smaller size spin fits that I could get a bit deeper, the nozzles did cause me some discomfort. My ears are probably a little bit narrower in terms of the ear canal than most people's, so it may not be a problem for you, but I thought it was worth mentioning. While we're talking tips, let's come back around and talk a bit about all these varied reviews that are out there. In preparation for my review of the KS2s, and while I was waiting for them to come through the shipping delays caused by COVID, I did a bit of reading, and what I found was there were vastly different reviews on these. Everything from they're the best thing since sliced bread, all the way through to they're dreadful and no one should ever buy them. I think I understand the reason for that, having played around with them a little bit. And that is that they have a specific tuning that can get a bit nasty depending on a number of factors. One of those factors will be the choice of tips, but more importantly, the insertion depth that those tips allow you to achieve. I played around with these quite a bit using my normal spin fits and spiral dots as well as the stock tips to see what was going to work well, and ultimately my decision was that the stock tips provided were probably a fairly good balance of insertion depth and comfort, and I wouldn't probably mess around with other tips on these earphones unless you're having particular problems with the fit of the stock ones provided. A big reason for that is that insertion depth on an earphone like this can be the difference between enjoying them and hating them because of the treble response changes it can create. With that in mind, let's segue into talking about the sound quality, and I'll talk a bit more after that about the source pairings that will work well and not well with the KS2.
and I will moon and take you traveling the world. But I can love you. Yeah, I'm gonna love you. I'll give you all of what I've got. The fancy things, baby, I have not. Just gonna love you. Yeah, I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna love you, babe. Cross my heart and hope to die.
I actually think the KS2s are fairly well balanced for a cheap hybrid. I've listened to a lot of hybrid earphones over the years, whether they're the same as the KS2 with a single dynamic and a single balanced armature, or some of the more complex single dynamic and multiple balanced armature IEMs. A common theme with most of them has been a tendency to tune bright in the treble. What often happens is you get a V-shaped sound with the dynamic driver bass coupled with bright balanced armature treble, and the end result can be quite fatiguing. So for me, depending on the source and the insertion depth I was using, the KS2s actually are quite balanced. They're still V-shaped, I'm not suggesting they're linear, but they're better balanced than some other hybrid IEMs I've tried in the past, and more expensive ones even. Given the right setup, what I found from the KS2s was they've got a little bit of emphasis around the area of consonants in the frequency range, so that's about the 4 to 6K range, and that means that they can occasionally just border on sibilant, or if you get the wrong pairing of source and insertion depth, they can get quite harsh around that consonant range. The bass production is quite impressive for a $25 earphone and really hits with some authority when needed, but it can get just a little bit loose sometimes on particularly bassy tracks. I found the Signature overall, again given the right setup, to be quite enjoyable, very well balanced as a V-shaped sound signature with a bass boost and another boost around the upper mids and lower treble. Something that really stood out to me was the quality of the imaging from the KS2s. I found them to be really good, again keeping in mind their price. Along with that imaging was a decent soundstage that stretched a fair distance and had a little bit of depth to it. These are not giant killer IEMs, but if you're looking for a basic upgrade from IEMs that were provided with a phone or just cheap $5 things you might have picked up somewhere, these are going to give you a taste of what spending more money can do, but they're not going to achieve the same levels of quality as what more expensive IEMs can do. Let's come back around now and talk a bit more about why there are such varied experiences and reviews for the KS2. In my time with them, I tried them across a range of sources, everything from the TT2 over here, which is massive overkill of course, into the AK240 stainless steel, which is also overkill, and then down to something a little bit more modest, like the Dragonfly Cobalt. Across those three sources, there are quite different sound signature and presentation styles. The AK240 is probably the most lean of the three, the TT2 being the most neutral and transparent of the three, and then the Cobalt being the warmest. What I found was the KS2s definitely sounded their best when paired up with the Cobalt. Listening from the TT2, a recording like Amber Rubath's Don't You got really nasal and sharp in that consonant range that I mentioned before, because the TT2 was just delivering everything so flat. The Cobalt helped to actually warm things up a little bit and made the KS2s a much more enjoyable listen. What that says to me is that when you're reading or watching different reviews of the KS2s, it's really important to see if the reviewer has talked about the product that they've used to deliver the sound of the KS2s, in other words their DAC, their amp, etc. The tonal character of that source device is going to play a big role in these. I should add, I'm not making excuses for the KS2 here. I do believe an IEM should not be this source dependent. What this actually means is that there's too much boost being given in certain frequencies, and when you get what I've often referred to before as a negative synergy, where a source device hits or does not soften the frequencies where the KS2 in this case are over pushed, we get some nasty sound experiences. So for me, I think the KS2 is an earphone you have to think pretty carefully about buying. You need to know that you've got a slightly warm sounding source device, and or that you've got enough tip options or just a general sound preference that's either going to allow you to enjoy their bright treble in the 4K to 6K range, or do something that's going to pull it back a little bit with, say, foam tips or a device that you know to be a little bit warmer and richer in sound. You could of course also EQ these to fix any problems that way. The good news is, if you can get the tonal balance right, the KS2s can be really rewarding. It's just a matter of getting that tonal balance right. To put things in perspective a little further, I've done my usual comparisons. As always, there could be a million different IEMs that would be a good comparison for the KS2, but I had to stick to what I had here. If you want more comparisons in the future, consider subscribing, joining Patreon, buying some merchandise, or buying through the affiliate links below to help support the channel to allow me to do even more comparisons by having more gear on hand. At the moment I have to buy most of the gear myself, and so I can only afford to have a small number of comparison items on hand at any one point in time. Moving on though, what I had on hand were the SIMGOT MT3 IEMs that are about $70 and also the BLON BL03, which are about $39 Starting with the MT3s from SIMGOT, I expected better things from those. I reviewed them quite some time ago, way back at the beginning of this channel, and I quite liked them for what they were, recognizing that they're a budget IEM. Up against the KS2 though, the KS2, when set up with the right system, sounded better than the MT3. The MT3's bass was thicker and therefore a bit slower, and the high frequency range, whilst boosted a bit higher up and therefore not as prone to sibilance around consonants, instead has this really metallic sheen to it in comparison to the KS2. So both of these IEMs are not natural, they are boosted and V-shaped, but the KS2 has a better version of that tuning based on my preferences and my listening compared to the MT3. For the $25 versus $70 price tag, I would definitely choose the KS2s over the MT3s every time. Moving on to perhaps a better comparison because of the closer price, but also the extremely good reputation and performance of the BL03s, we're looking now at two very close competitors that many people will be weighing up side by side. The KS2s, with their better ergonomics and their nice thin design, are going to be more comfortable for most people. The BL03s have a really weird design that a lot of people have trouble getting to fit. For me, I have to use spin fits to get a little bit of extra angle on the nozzle, or at least from the tip, to allow me to get a good seal in my ear. With that done, and again using the same source for both, what I find is that the BL03s are a richer, warmer sound. They've actually got a better soundstage and imaging than the KS2s, and whilst they're still an overall V-shaped sound, they've balanced it much better by not over boosting the treble. The bass has a bit more prominence in the BL03s compared to the treble, and that makes them a much more enjoyable listen. They're not a perfect IEM by any stretch. They've got some problems with the quality of the sound that comes through in terms of the timbral qualities. There's a little bit of grain in the treble, or metallicness in the treble, I'd say. So I'm not suggesting the blondes are perfect and that should be the end of your journey, but in looking at the two, I think if you can get past the ergonomic challenges of the blondes, I would go for those over the KS2. But the KS2s are definitely more comfortable, and for those that like a slightly brighter sound, you probably will prefer the KS2s, so it's going to come down partly to personal preference. The BL03s are a bit outdated now, but do let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in me doing a proper, thorough review of the BL03. For now though, let's summarize the KS2 experience. For me, the KS2 is worth a shot for $25 so long as you know what you're getting into. Ergonomically, they're good. Design, so look and feel, they're really good. The cable's fine, it's just a bit tangle prone, which many of the cables at this price point are. So ultimately for me, they're an IEM I would recommend with caveats. The caveats being, are you comfortable with a slightly brighter V-shaped sound with a focus on that consonant area? Do you have a warmer source that can maybe help to tame that sound a little bit? And or do you have foam tips that you could use? These are a standard size bore. Do you have foam tips you could use to help pull that treble back if you find it too much? So if you either enjoy that sound signature I've described, or you've got some pieces in place to help tame it slightly, I do think the KS2s are worth a go if you just enjoy trying new things, or if you're looking for an upgrade from something of a very basic quality. I do think they're worth the $25 if they're a style of earphone that you enjoy in terms of sound signature. They're well made, they look and feel good, and the sound they produce is good if you enjoy that sort of thing. So if that's of interest to you, I'll put a link down below where you can buy the KS2s either with or without the microphone, and I'll leave you to enjoy the music until next time I see you here on Passion for Sound.